Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tomorrow marks 1 full year of Donald Trump's second presidency, a year defined by bold moves, sharp reversals and mounting questions over US global leadership. From Ukraine and Iran to China, NATO and the Middle East, Trump's national security record has reshaped alliances and tested long-standing assumptions. Has America become stronger or more isolated? And is Trump executing a strategy or improvising under pressure? Well, joining us to assess year one is Mark Toth. He's co-founder of Intrep 360. Mark, a pleasure as always. Welcome back to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
The same, Ashim. Thank you.
So I was very interested in reading the report that you penned at Intrep 360 about Trump's first year. What were your main conclusions as to his legacy in terms of national security from that year?
Yeah, Ashim, it's not a good legacy in the making here. While there may have been some individual successes from the short-term standpoint, for instance, saying, look, we need to get to 1.5 trillion defense spending, that's good. It's only good, though, if it's done in conjunction with NATO in some type of similar alliance in the Indo-Pacific. The idea that the U.S. does need a golden dome, a defensive layered shield, if you will, to protect against emerging threats, ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, drones, et cetera. That's good. But it's not good if you're coercing Greenland, if you're offending NATO allies, and the like. And so from our standpoint, whatever short-term gains he's had this year, including some boxing in of China in terms of threatening some of their traditional oil resources, be it in places like Nigeria, Venezuela, potentially in Iran in the coming days, all those things are good, but they haven't not been worth the cost, the long-term cost of the U.S. in terms of what this is doing to our allies, what it is doing to our standing in the transatlantic alliance, and the messaging that it's sending to our Indo-Pacific allies that, hey, if they're not reliable in Europe, they're probably not going to be reliable here in the Pacific.
Right. So I want to get into some of those in detail in just a second, but it sounds to me as though you're saying that he's not thinking strategically enough, that many of his actions are spontaneous. Am I understanding you correctly?
Ashim, you are 100%. Look, this is a man that tends to look at things transactionally. And the problem is when you look at transactionally, you're not necessarily always looking long term. Businessmen want that immediate return. They're if they're looking at the stock market as a measure, it's all about what you've done for me in the last year. And I think you can see a lot of that type of thinking reflected in Trump's decisions. It's what he's getting in terms of an immediate gratification in his mind that's good. But the problem is the damage to the balance sheet to get those short-term earnings within a year has been devastating, and no more so than NATO, the messaging that it's sending to our NATO allies, the cost that it's been to Ukraine in the long term and to European security in the long term. You hit it right on the head. Yes, he's got short-term gains, but at a huge, horrible, terrible long-term cost.
Right. Well, you mentioned Ukraine. I'd like to talk about that for a second. Many were surprised by how seemingly he's been pro-Putin and anti-Zelensky. How does one kind of understand that approach?
Yeah, Ashim, as we started out in the Intrep report that you're referring to, we've kind of argued, John Street and I, my writing partner, that the world is involved in an ideological third world war, kind of West against China and Russia and their axis of equal partners, that's turning increasingly kinetic. And we were arguing, it's not Hollywood's version, it's not mushroom clouds, it's war by 1,000 cuts around the globe. We were arguing that it was there for the taking. All Trump had to do was to put Putin down for the count. He was stuck in Ukraine at the beginning of the year in 2025. He wasn't going anywhere. His economy is pretty much tapped out. The right thing to do, the tactical thing to do, the strategic thing to do was to say, hey, Putin, you're done, right? We're going to just up the ante with Ukraine. We're going to give them what they need. And you could have collapsed Putin's position on the battlefield. That just didn't happen. Instead, he started throwing these lifelines, again, in a transactional way. way. There are multiple reasons probably as to why. Some of it is Trump's ego. Some of it is the idea that he thinks, he needs a peer like a Putin to stand up to look strong himself. Some of it has to do with internal debate in the Pentagon and the White House about needing Russia as a potential ally. Might be too strong of the word, but a potential asset to be used against a resurgent China down the line, and that they're trying to strip that away. I think that's naive, as we pointed out in the report. That could explain some of it. So to get back to your question, I think this Jekyll and Hyde approach that we've seen towards one day blaming Putin, one day blaming Zelensky, is simply Trump trying to be transactional and force a deal out of these guys. I don't think he really cares about Ukraine in the long term, except what he can make money out of it. And I think in his mind, cards-wise, is that Zelensky has the lesser of those cards because it's dependent on Trump and the West, whereas Putin has staying power. I think he's wrong. I think it's short-sighted, but it is what it is.
And an opportunity missed, as you said. Now, when Trump attacked the Iranian nuclear facilities, was that an opportunity missed also, Mark? Should he have finished the job?
We're very hesitant. Yeah. John and I are very hesitant ever to call for regime change, right? We're not big, strong believers in that, a classic neocon. We don't see ourselves as neocon. We see defense spurs, deterrence spurs. But the nuclear threat in Iran was a unique threat emerging, one that we had covered for multiple years and were concerned about because it was getting very close. I know there was a lot of confusion at the time because people have been hearing about Iran's nuclear breakout as though it was just around the corner, and they were hearing that year after year after year. The problem is what was meant by that, going from 60% highly enriched uranium to 90% highly enriched uranium is something that could happen within weeks. That acceleration, if that pedal were hit, was almost immediate, and that's what was getting desperate. So look, Trump's decision finally to act was smart. It was an A+. It was an easy grade to take out those nuclear facilities, but he didn't finish the job. He left Khamenei and his thugs around to continue to terrorize the region, to continue to terrorize his own people, and we've seen that to great tragic effect here since December 28th. But who knows? We know we have around 5,000 confirmed deaths. It could be as high as 16,000. I've even heard reports saying it's 40,000 Iranians that have been slaughtered by the Khamenei regime. And so from that standpoint, it turned what was an A in our mind for Trump on Iran into an F, just because of the human cost involved. And part of that, just real quickly here, Yashim, was because the U.S. wasn't positioned military-wise to do anything about it. We decided to move forces into the Caribbean to deal with Venezuela, and that left the Middle East denuded of assets, and it created this opportunity for Khamenei to act. And Khamenei did. He murdered a lot of people.
Well, sadly and tragically, of course, he did. And yes, we don't know enough of what happened because of the news blackout, but surely it will seep out slowly. Now, moving on to Greenland, President Trump, has a negotiating style where he starts with maximalist demands and then backs down a little bit, and there's a negotiated outcome. It doesn't seem to be going that way with Greenland. He hasn't shifted. What do you think his intention is?
Yeah, that is $1 million question, and shame. I think a lot of this posturing that certainly increased in tone and just got very bombastic over the last few days. It is all about him appearing in Davos, trying to set the agenda there, trying to make people uncomfortable in the room so that he can demand in a maximalist way what he wants. All I can say is that in the United States itself, there is widespread skepticism about this kind of approach. Most Americans do not support either buying Greenland, let alone conquering it with the military. There's a lot of pushback on the sidelines, behind the scenes, and the Republican side of things. And you've got the midterms coming up in 2026 here later this year that I think this would be a horrible platform for the GOP to try to run on. Probably would lose the House over it. So I think a lot of this is bluster. I think, and again, from my perspective as an American, I find it embarrassing. This is the U.S. could have had everything that it wanted in Greenland and what it needs for its Golden Dome system under an existing 1941 treaty. There was no need to go here. So for me as an American, it's just embarrassing the way that it's treated our European allies, the messaging that it's sent to you, the divide that it's causing. My own personal opinion is that Europe basically should stand up to Trump and say, we're not following this. We're united. If anything, you're motivating us to basically say you're not a reliable ally, and we're going to, treat the United States, at least until there's a new president, on that basis going forward. Sad to say that. I want every president to succeed, but not if this is the cost and not if this is the method.
Well, certainly Ursula von der Leyen and President Macron have both said something similar. Ursula von der Leyen saying, a deal is a deal, and President Macron saying, we're not going to back down, and Prime Minister Tusk saying something. Saying something similar as well. You mentioned the midterms coming up, Mark. How much of an impact do you think they will have on the midterm results? Will the Republicans lose the House?
Yeah, Ishim, I'm not a political analyst, so I'm always a little bit hesitant, and we're intentionally apolitical in our national security analyses, so I'm always a little hesitant to go there. The problem is so much in terms of the control of Congress, especially the House of Representatives. It's so baked in these days with the way the congressional districts are mapped. And you've seen shenanigans both in Texas and in California lately to try to create advantages there. That makes it extremely difficult to flip many seats in the old ways, where you might have had a wave of 30, 40, 50 seats at a time flipping in the midterms, as was the norm, as opposed to the exception now. The question is whether or not Trump, by the end of this year, and he's only got really in earnest, typically most U.S. election cycles start around Labor Day. So, we're looking at 8 months here for him to make sure the economy is turned around if he wants to maintain control of the House. I suspect, but I can't know, I'm really, really bad at this, to be honest with you. I suspect it probably costs him the House. I don't think most Americans are comfortable with his foreign policy approach. Many are, for sure, but I think a majority at this point just simply are not. They don't like seeing our NATO allies treated the way that they are. They don't like us seeing threaten Greenland the way that we're doing.
Well, certainly there does seem to have been pushback against that move. Very, very briefly, in the last 30 seconds or so that we have left, Mark, your thoughts on the Board of Peace?
Yeah, I think it's a big misfire because it's really not about Gaza, Ashim. And I'm glad that you asked this question. I think it's more about some kind of parallel organization. And so far, the names that I've seen listed, the ones that have accepted it, are basically, it's a list of rogue states. Why would you think these people, and oftentimes they're the ones committing wars, they're the ones that are actively assisting the wars, like, Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. Why would he be on this? Makes no sense. Why would Putin be on it, given what he's done in Syria, propping up the, Bashir Assad regime all of those years? Makes no sense to me. I think it's an embarrassment to the U.S. It had a lot of potential. Palestinians certainly deserve a better future that are living in Gaza and the West Bank. It could have had a great way forward in terms of advancing the Abraham Accords, but the way that it's being constructed right now just seems to be some kind of private corporatized entity that's not about Gaza itself, but about Trump's view of how he can control the world going forward. I think it's a bad idea the way that it's being played out.
Especially considering, Putin is an indicted war criminal and what he's doing to civilians in Ukraine, it does beg a belief. Mark Toth, as always, a great pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing your analysis, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good evening, sir.
Great. Thank you, Ashim. Always a pleasure to be on. You're the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.